Okay, welcome back once again. Hello. So last time we spoke about Christian anti-Semitism into the modern age. We talked about the Black Death, and we talked about the Statute of Toledo with the first blood racial purity laws against people of Jewish descent. Then we moved into the Reformation. We touched on Martin Luther, who was the progenitor of the anti-Semitism we're going to talk about today. And then we talked about the emancipation of Jews, the end of the 18th century. Hold on. So today we're going to talk about German anti-Semitism specifically, and how that laid the foundation for Nazi Germany. So, touching in the back of the class, very nice. Anyhow, Johann Eisenmenger, at the end of the, what century was it? 18th. There you go. At the end of the 18th century, wrote a book called Judaism Unmasked. No, that was a little later. Anyway, at the end of the 18th century, this book was written against Jews, and in it, Jews are viewed primarily as heretics. So the perfidy is based on their religious sensibilities. This is still Christian anti-Semitism. Okay, but at the end of the 19th century, another book by Jacob Fries on the endangerment of Germany by Jews. The anti-Semitism directed against Jews is because they are immoral asocials, bent on destroying society. Okay, so the nature of the anti-Semitism has changed. No longer is it religious, but it's more that the Jews themselves as people are debased and corrupt. Okay, and now as the rise of Jews are only really viewed as a nation or a political affiliation, it's not a religion anymore. Okay, so we're talking around the time of emancipation, so there were liberal people that decided that Jews should be freed, but there were also conservatives and anti-Semites that were saying that Jews should never be freed. Okay, but they all agreed that Jewishness and Germanness were incompatible. And not only that, but that Jewishness, was deleterious, that it was negative. Okay, so a quote to illustrate that: "The Jew appears as a distortion, a shadow, the dark side of human nature." Okay, so the Jews were seen as Fremdkörper, which means alien body. So they were viewed as fundamentally different, and they were blamed for everything that was wrong in Germany. Okay, and the arguments about Jewish place in society started from the first emancipation of Jews by a German state, and that was in 1807, and the argument continued up until their complete emancipation in 1869. Okay, so let's talk a bit about who these anti-Semites were. So conservatives and Volkish elements. So we're going to talk about what a Volk means a little later, but these made up the core anti-Semites. And they were not in favor of Jews being given civil rights. But there were liberals that were in favor of giving Jews civil rights. A classic example of this was von Dohm, who wrote on the civic improvement of Jews. So Jews should be free, so you would think this would be good. However, it should be taken with a bit of a grain of salt, because the liberals still believed that the Jew was fundamentally negative. Okay, even von Dohm said the Jew is more man than a Jew. Okay, and freeing Jews into society would allow them to assimilate and would stop being Jewish. Okay, even when they were freed, for example in Baden in 1809, they were actually put on probation. So part of the document emancipating them said, this legal equality can become fully operative only when you in general exert yourselves to match it in your political and moral formation. Okay, so you're free, but you have to stop being Jewish. Okay, you have to stop being Jews. Okay, so the only difference between the anti-Semites and conservatives and the liberals was that a Jew could change their nature. Okay, it wasn't that being a Jew is negative or not negative. Everybody agreed being a Jew is negative. Okay, but liberals believed that a Jew could change if we just free them and let them out into society. So a quote from David Sorkin, who's a historian of that time, said, "Underlying the discussion of emancipation was the image of a corrupt and debased Jewish people. Because of this image, emancipation became linked with the Jewish people's moral regeneration. The debate turned on whether this regeneration was possible." Okay, so again, even though the Jews were defended by liberal proponents in Germany, okay, it wasn't bad faith, because it wasn't protecting Jews for being Jews. It was protecting them as long as they would change.
What year are we right now?
Right now, we're in the time between 1810 and 1870. Okay, so it's in that entire time period here. So, for example, in 1849, okay, the Bavarian Parliament. Does everybody know where Bavaria is?
Europe.
Okay, where in Europe? Take a guess. Where would it be?
Germany.
Yes, we're talking about Germany. It's in Germany. Where in Germany?
East.
No. West. It's in southern Germany. In southern Germany. Okay. Do you know what the capital of Bavaria was? Still is? No, that's capital of Prussia. We'll get there in a second. Munich was the capital of Bavaria, and we're going to talk about that because it plays a large part in Hitler's rise to political power. But in 1849, the Bavarian Parliament discussed a bill to grant Jews full equality. Okay? And a remarkable feat of political, participation. There were petitions from over 1,700 Bavarian communities collected in just 3 months. Okay, signed by an estimated 20% of the adult male population, all against freeing Jews. Okay, there was only support from 3 Bavarian communities. Okay, so you have to remember this is in a time before cars, okay, before electricity. So even in a time like that, it was still this issue of Jews receiving rights was still a large enough issue, okay, to arouse the entire Bavarian population to rise against it, for the most part. Okay, there was an assertion that freeing the Jews was akin to putting a fox in the chicken coop. Okay, so there was this irrational fear that there's Jewish power. If we free them, they'll take us over and subjugate us, and we won't have any freedom at all. Okay, so we said the Jews were given formal rights in 1867. In 1880, in Germany, there was a nationwide campaign for the rescission, which means to take away, of Jewish rights, and it gained 265,000 signatures. Okay, it was debated by Parliament for 2 days. Okay, so this is, you can imagine on C-SPAN them talking about giving Jews civil rights today. They'd be talking for 2 days. That's a lot of airtime. Okay, and it wasn't just that this was hatred from the lower, uneducated classes. This type of anti-Semitism came from prosperous and educated classes, from the aristocracy, from the clergy. Okay, what percentage of the German population do you think Jews were at this point in time? How much?
1%.
Lower. Lower. 1%. Okay, Jews were 1% of the population. Okay, but society was clearly obsessed with this. Okay, Ludwig Born was a writer in this era. He was a baptized Jew, so he converted to Christianity. And he said, "It is like a wonder. I have experienced it thousands of times, and yet it remains new to me. Some blame me for being a Jew, others forgive me, and still more even praise me for it. But all think about it. It is as though they are spellbound in this magical Jewish circle, and no one can get out." Okay, so even though Jews make up this minuscule part of the population, everybody's talking about it. And everybody has an opinion. So there's nobody not going out and voting. Everybody cares about Jews. Okay, some people want to give them rights, but the majority of people want to take them away. Okay, the Rhineland State Parliament. So where's the Rhineland?
Europe.
Where in Germany? No.
West. France.
Yes, it's in Western Germany. It's on the French-German border. Yes. Okay, they had a debate about how the Judenfrage, which means Jewish problem, will touch the entire world. Okay, so the Germans believed that the Jews everywhere were a problem for the world, and there started to be discussions on how to take care of this problem. Okay, and this we're going to talk about eliminationist anti-Semitism. Okay, just of note, it's striking about how frequent this anti-Semitism about Jews was linked to sexual depravity. Okay? So Jews were charged with prostitution, but also with defiling German virgins. Okay? So it was definitely the link to Jews and sexuality was kind of fantastic. If you think about it, this is actually the ultimate, right? If you talk about blood purity and keeping lines pure, the ultimate act that a Jew could do to wreck this blood purity would be to attack an unsuspecting German woman, okay, and wreck her for everybody else. Okay, so this gained currency at this time. It's also interesting to know that that was a primary part of Nazi propaganda. Okay, it was published by Der Stürmer. Who wrote Der Stürmer? Anybody? No? He was hanged at Nuremberg.
Himmler.
No, Himmler was not hanged at Nuremberg. He committed suicide. Anyway. Mengele? No, Mengele was also not hanged at Nuremberg. Julius Streicher. Okay, Julius Streicher is a very prominent Nazi at the time. He wrote Der Stürmer. He wrote it even before the Nazis came to power, but it frequently talked about how Jews were sexual deviants. Okay? And also at this time there was the rise of the blood libel. Even in a time that really wasn't so long ago, people think of the blood libel as being something from the Middle Ages. There were 12 trials regarding blood libels between 1867 and 1914 in Germany. Okay, so they were still bringing it up right up until the First World War. Okay? Now, at this point in time, there was no internet, there was no TV, there was no radio. Okay, so what was the most important method of political, discourse or information? How do people get their information?
Newspaper?
Yes, newspapers. Daily newspapers were... You had a question?
No,
Okay. Newspapers, daily newspapers were the most important. Also pamphlets. Okay, anybody that had something to say would get together and they'd write a pamphlet on whatever they wanted. Okay, so in the last 3 decades of the 19th century, there were an estimated 1,200 publications on the Jewish problem. Okay, by one estimate, that is more than all publications on any other topic in Germany at all at that point in time. Okay, so everything else. Okay, foreign policy, Catholics versus Protestants, anything. The economy, none of it was as important as what to do with the Jews. Okay, so this tells you how preoccupied the German mind was with anti-Semitism. Okay, central features of this anti-Semitism was that Jews held immense power and they were very dangerous to society. What's more than that, they were also parasitic and they contributed nothing to society. So that's two technically different things. They are society, they control society, or they don't control society but they take everything away from it. And even worse, it's not that Jews were just parasites and they were unknowing, they did it on purpose. Jews were thought to be parasitic on purpose to debase society, to corrupt its moral character. Okay, I quote from this time, "The Jews are a rapidly growing parasitic plant that winds around the still healthy tree to suck up the life juice until the trunk, emaciated and eaten from within, falls moldering from decay." Okay, so at this point in time, there was common use of naturalistic organic metaphors, but you can see it's incredibly negative. The Jews completely destroyed society just by existing. Okay. At this point in time, also in the 1840s, there was the rise of definitions of race. Okay, so German nationalism was on the rise. Germans became very involved with defining who they were, and part of that was defining who the Jews were. Okay, so what rose is the definition of folk. Okay, so it's translated as people or nation, but it means something more than that. It has pagan meaning. It has connection to the soil. It's very organic. Okay? But Jews could never become Germans. Okay? A quote from this time again: a sense of vigor and love for the fatherland based on Germanic Christian spirit and German racial unity. Okay? And the Jew was known as the eternal thoroughbred of foreignness. So Germans were beginning to define themselves, but they only define themselves as Germanic Christians, so no Jews can be a part of it. Okay, even if they convert, we're going to see very soon, race overtook Christianity's definition of a Christian. Okay, Johann Nordman said conversion to Christianity can no more transform Jews into Germans than to turn the skin of a black person white. Okay, so a Jew can never change. A Jew is always negative and will never be able to get away from it. Okay? Another quote: even the most honest Jew, under the inescapable influence of his blood, the carrier of his Semitic morality, which is fully opposed to German morality, must work everywhere towards the subversion and destruction of German nature, morality, and German civilization. Okay? And at the end of this, the German Volk needs only to topple the Jews to be united and free. So here we see that the preoccupation of the Germans with Jews has gone to a point where the Germans feel they have to get rid of the Jews to survive. Okay, so if they don't get rid of the Jews, the Germans will die. So it becomes a life or death struggle for the Germans. Okay? Half of the anti-Semitic pamphlets of this time offered no solution. A very prominent anti-Semite is Wilhelm Marr. Does anybody know why Wilhelm Marr is a prominent anti-Semite? No. Okay? Where do we get the word anti-Semite? Who made up anti-Semite? Yes. Wilhelm Marr made up the coined the phrase anti-Semite. Okay? It is specifically in reference to Jews. It's not in reference to any other Semitic peoples that may claim that. Anyhow, he said that by emancipating the Jews, Germany had already lost. Okay? So, it's too late for the Germans. Yes?
Who is William Marr?
Okay, so Wilhelm Marr, in 1877, coined the term anti-Semitism. He was a very famous anti-Semitic writer of that time. Okay, but what he's most famous for is coining that term.
German?
Yes, he was German. Right? Well, it's from shame. So technically, that could be thought to cover Arabs as well, right? Ishmaelites. Okay, but it was coined specifically in reference to Jews. Okay, so even though it was a much broader term, it really just means anti-Judaism or anti-Jews. Okay, so some of these pamphlets did offer solutions. Okay, solutions went from Jewish disappearance to assimilation. So let's free them and make them assimilate so they disappear. Rescission of rights. So let's take all their rights away, and that way we'll subjugate them. They'll have no power anymore. Forced expulsion, okay, with shade of the Spanish expulsion, okay, but also total annihilation of the Jewish people, okay, in the 1800s. But if you think about all of these are really eliminationist themes, okay? All these solutions are to get rid of the Jews, okay? Just some of these writers were not willing to take it to the complete extent. Okay, a historian named Feldman at this time did an analysis of 51 prominent anti-Semitic writers between 1861 and 1895. 28 writers proposed solutions, okay, and 19 of them called for physical extermination of the Jews. Okay, so from between 1861 and 1895, fully half of these prominent anti-Semitic writers were already contemplating the total physical killing of all Jews. Okay? So, it's obvious that we have to talk about anti-Semitism before Nazism. It's not just a one-time thing that showed up specifically because the Jews were doing something negative after the First World War, even something in the 1930s. This was something well entrenched in German society, well entrenched in Christian society, as we've seen, and it was a major proponent, you have to say, of every German's life. Every German experienced anti-Semitism and had an opinion on it. Okay? There was nobody that was really impartial in this issue. Okay? It's interesting to note that only one of these anti-Semitic writers viewed the Jews as a religious entity. Okay? So now pretty much everybody says the Jews are not just a religion. Okay? 32 viewed the Jewish nature as unchanging. Okay, so Jews can never change. So all of them think that the Jews are negative. 19 of them want to kill every one of the Jews existing. And most of them say that Jews can never change. Von Dove, who was that liberal that we talked about at the beginning, said that the logic of the anti-Semites implies that one must wipe Jews off the face of the earth. So even the ones that didn't say, let's kill them now, if you take their logic and extend it to its logical conclusion, it must be that it will conclude in extermination. Okay? Also, at the end of the 19th century, anti-Semitism begins to become the basis for political discourse in terms of parties getting elected to governments. Okay, in 1899, it's important to note that in the second half of the 19th century, there were parties founded that just had anti-Semitism as their platform. They had no other platform. They ran specifically on getting rid of Jews. Just that. Okay, in 1899, the United Anti-Semitic Parties of Hamburg said, thanks to the development of modern communication, the Jewish problem will become a global problem and will be jointly solved by other nations with the total segregation of, and if self-defense should demand it, finally through the annihilation of the Jewish people. Okay, so even political parties are running on the basis of killing Jews.
So if those people were running just on the basis of killing Jews, let's say they were elected, how would they run the government? Like, would they be like, all right, all Jews leave? Or,
so they would work specifically towards that. So none of them ever ran. They never gained enough votes. We're going to talk about how many they gained. They never gained enough votes that they controlled the country. So they would probably work with. We're going to see they allied themselves with the conservative elements of the government, which is really the Prussian aristocracy. So they would really work in conjunction with them. They never really. Meaning at that time, like for example, there's some parties, say like the Green Party or things of that nature, like Ralph Nader. They don't really run on broad spectrum of politics. Okay, they just want to make their one issue, right? They just care about that issue. You're right. The question is, what would you do if you get into government? I'm not sure what they would do. Probably the first order of business would be to get rid of the Jews, and then they focus on everything else, right? But they specifically didn't care about anything else. They just focused on the Jews. Okay. Another historian, question.
What time period is this? When they?
Okay, so this is 1899. So this is starting in the second half of the 19th century. So we're going to talk about politics in Germany and other European countries before World War I. So you're going to see around 1871 is when Germany became unified. So it would be around this time.
How many countries are only 2 countries now?
Excuse me?
How many countries are there in Germany now?
How many countries are there in Germany right
now? It's not united.
Oh, at this point in time, over 300. There are 300 city-states and principalities and weird, grand duchies, things like that are left over from, medieval times. Any question on it? No? Okay. Another historian, Yachman, said, in the 1890s, anti-Semitism infiltrated every last citizens' association, penetrating folk clubs and cultural societies. Okay, so it's important to realize that it's not just political parties, because not everybody belongs to a political party, But you would think that everybody has some sort of association. As Jews, we belong to shuls, things like that. Okay? Germans and secularized people, they belong to, culture societies, reading circles, art societies. All of these societies had anti-Semitic elements as part of their meetings. Okay, so
were any of them involved in symphonies?
yes, classical music was very popular at that time. Actually, Hitler was very interested in classical music. Actually, he was really only interested in one composer, Wagner. He was really only interested in him. It actually plays a large part in some of his metaphors that he uses at the end of his life, like Götterdämmerung, which means twilight of the gods. We'll talk about that a little later. Even a leader of the National Liberals, named Ludwig Bamberger, said the organs that are the lifeblood of the nation, the army, schools, and scholarly world are filled to the brim with anti-Semitism. It has become an obsession that leaves no one untouched. Okay, so again, just trying to give you the view that anti-Semitism permeated Germany and all Germans' consciousness, okay, even at this point in time. So, we were talking about, there was a question asked about how do these anti-Semitic parties hope to run the government. So they didn't, really. But the Conservative Party, okay, co-opted their message, meaning the Conservative Party took it as their own. So they incorporated their conservative elements, but they also said, oh, we're also an anti-Semitic party. Okay, so at their Tivoli program in 1892, they said, we combat the widely obtruding and decomposing Jewish influence on our political life. Popular life, excuse me. Okay, so now you have basically the entire rightward spectrum of German society is politically associated with anti-Semitism. So they're not just anti-Semitic, but they try to affect anti-Semitic change on a political level. In 1893, avowedly anti-Semitic parties gained a majority of seats in the Reichstag. Okay? So parties with anti-Semitic platforms made up more than 50% of the government. Okay? Purely anti-Semitic parties, meaning ones that ran just on that and nothing else, gained 19.6% of the vote. And as you can see, an enormous part of German society cast their votes just to get rid of Jews. Okay? So that really sets the tone for German anti-Semitism that we're going to encounter with the Nazi Party. Okay, but now I thought we would take a step back. We want to talk about how the Nazi Party started. You really can't do that, and how it rose to power. You really can't do that without talking about World War I. Okay? And I thought that to really understand what happened in World War I, we have to talk about what happened before World War I. So here is hopefully a quick rundown of the major European powers in the era before the First World War. So this is after Napoleon. Okay, so we're going to start from, this basically starts from after 1815. Okay, so first we're going to start off with Russia. Okay, what government did Russia have in 1815? No, that would be 1917. Again, 1917. Marx didn't finish writing Das Kapital until... he did finish the Communist Manifesto until 1848.
The czars?
Yes. Okay? It was an autocracy. Okay? The Tsar had total control of the Russian system. He was also the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Okay, so he maximized political control.
So what do you explain communism and autocracy?
Well, communism really, I guess, its stated goal is that everybody's equal, that everybody shares equally. An autocracy is ruled by one person, and they control everything. It's important at this time he also has to deal with the nobility. Okay, but the autocracy basically means that an immense amount of power is concentrated with one person, which is the Tsar. He's the head of state, he's the head of the church. Okay, Russian peasants called him our father. And so basically controls the entire life of Russians. Okay, but at this time people began to move against the Tsar. The first political revolution against the Tsar was in December 1825. Okay, but it was completely crushed. Okay, at this time from the time of 1811 to 1863, the population of Russia went from 41 to 75 million. Okay, so an immense population explosion. But 42 million people of these were serfs. Okay, serfs mean essentially they're not slaves. They have slight freedom. Okay, but they belonged to their master, and they either had to pay a certain part of their crop, or they had to pay monetary fees, or they had to work in the master's house. Okay? Some could even be bought and sold with the land. That's how little power they had over their own lives. Their owner could actually just pick up and sell them. Okay? So they were powerless. Okay? They were emancipated by Alexander II, known as the Tsar Liberator, in 1861. But the flaw with this is that they needed to pay to be free. Okay? And none of them had any money. So they weren't free. Okay, so it didn't really solve the problem. If any of you have Polish parents or grandparents, okay, at this point in time, Poland was controlled by Russia, except for Galicia. Galicia is Austria-Hungary. Okay, Poland rebelled in 1863, but was also brutally repressed. Okay, so we see that there's dissension beginning to rise in the Russian Empire, but they're able to put it down at this point in time. Around this time, in the 1870s, nationalism begins to increase, as well as what's known as Pan-Slavism. Okay? Pan-Slavism means that all Slavic peoples are united, and eventually they're going to get together and they're going to rule the world. Okay? So it's a very interesting type of political affiliation, but it's similar to what you're going to see in Germany with the rise of Nietzsche and the Teutonic Superman. Okay? Russians believe that all Slavic peoples were superior and they'd eventually get together and they'd rule the world. Okay? So they went to war, the Russians went to war against Turkey in 1877 to defend Serbia. Okay? The other time that they went to defend Serbia was in 1914. So Russia defending Serbia due to Pan-Slavism played a major role in triggering World War I. Okay, so you can see that it even started before that. Okay? Also, there's the rise of terrorism against the Russian Tsar. Okay, people were unhappy with how far the Tsar went. There was a lot of political believers in anarchy at this time. Okay, so the Tsar Liberator was assassinated in 1881. Okay, so people are beginning to want change. Okay, so the Russian peasant has been subjugated for an extremely long time. Now they're beginning to gain national identity. They're beginning to rise up and try to assert their own independence. Okay,
As what form of government do you have any?
So anarchists want no government, right? Marxism. When I talk, Marxism begins to rise at this time because Russia began to industrialize. Before then, it was mainly agrarian. Everybody's farmers. Okay, so at this point in time, they begin to industrialize. Okay, so that means you have a lot of workers. A lot of workers getting paid nothing in these massive complexes. Okay, Marxism, right? Marx's famous ending of the Communist Manifesto, right? Workers of the world unite. People began to become involved in Marxism. At about this time, Nikita Khrushchev, who became an eventual leader of Russia under the Soviet regime, okay, was born into one of these major iron works at this time. That's where he became a Marxist. In 1887, there was an attempted assassination attempt on the new Tsar. And this is interesting because one of the people killed had a brother named Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. Does anybody know what his other name is? It's remarkably famous in terms of Russian history. No. Yeah, exactly. Lenin's name was Ulyanov. Okay, but his brother was hanged for trying to kill the Tsar in 1887. Lenin was thrown out of school. He wanted to become a lawyer, and he decided, forget it, I'm going to work to get rid of the system. So this is where Lenin as a revolutionary was born.
So how did terrorism, like Polish terrorism, like back when it was?
So it wasn't that they really killed, they didn't try and kill women and children and things like that. They tried to kill people of power. So it's like assassinations used to be. So they They killed defense ministers. They killed a lot of generals. Okay, they killed one czar. Well, they eventually killed another czar after the communist revolution. So they began to try and kill people in the government. So that's really what terrorism was at that time. They didn't go around and just kill innocent people. They identified people that they thought were the system, and they tried to kill them. Okay, in 1904 and 1905, Russia went to war with Japan. Okay, over interest in China. At this point in time, colonialism, everybody's trying to expand, get as much land as they can. So Russia goes to war with Japan. And Japan basically obliterates the Russians. The Russians lose land in Port Arthur. They also lost their entire Pacific fleet, okay, in the Battle of the Tsushima Strait. Now, this is very important for future history because in World War II, the Japanese would always seek what they would call the Great Battle. Okay? They conceived that the only way to truly win a war was to basically have your fleet against our fleet. Who's ever left at the end wins. Okay? And that dictated a lot of their strategy, and that was really based on this victory of the Tsushima Strait. They saw it happen once. They thought that was the only way to win. Symbolically, they would fly, always before battle, they would fly the battle flag of the admiral that won this battle. So this battle played a very large part in their psyche. Okay? But also, this was the first large-scale use of the machine gun. Okay, it first came into being. The Gatling gun was used in the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. But this was the first successful use, large scale. This has going to become important in World War I because that is going to be the basis of warfare in the western part of the world, is really going to be based on strategic use of the machine gun. Okay? On January 9th, 1905, what's known as Bloody Sunday, peaceful marchers in St. Petersburg are fired on by troops of the Tsar, caused a revolution, okay, that led to the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. So the Tsar said, I'm going to give most of my power to the parliament, which was known as the Duma. Also, here is the first time you have the rise to prominence of major Bolshevik and Menshevik leaders such as Lenin and Trotsky. Okay, but this didn't work. Okay, the Tsar said in 1907, I'm going to get rid of the Duma. I'm taking all the power back. Okay, so you have a country that's changing. It's being industrialized. Everybody's beginning to exert themselves, and they're beginning to realize that they don't really want the Tsar around anymore. Okay? In 1912, there was a massacre at the Lena Gold Field. Killed over 200 people. Further again, more cries for revolution. The Tsar began to lose control of Russia, which sets the stage for what happened in World War I. Unfortunately, I have to leave now, so that will conclude what we have for this week.